really good video. Oh my gosh. This was a really good video. Ooh, I didn't know it would be so good. That was really good. Who knew? To the channel, I am your host, Osa. Today, we're going to react to a video by Thomas Sowell on intellectuals and society, all right? So let's get right to it.
Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/UNC Knowledge. That's twitter.com/UNC Knowledge.
So before we start, I just want to make a comment that apparently this video is not apparently this video is not as old as I thought it was, since Twitter's on there. But I know, just a little observation, so to speak. Let's continue.
Dr. Thomas Sowell has taught economics, intellectual history, and social policy at such institutions as Cornell, UCLA, and Amherst. The author of more than a dozen books, Dr. Sowell is now a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. His newest work, Intellectuals and Society. Tom, we'll begin with a quotation. Then candidate Barack Obama in July 2008, quote, "It's like these guys, Republicans, take pride in being ignorant. They should go talk to some experts and actually make a difference," close quote.
I was mad, animated with that. These guys gotta go ahead and talk to the experts about before we make some sort of assumptions, huh? That was mad. That was super animated, but let's continue.
Experts does make a difference. Many of the great disasters of our time have been committed by experts. You may remember FDR's brain trust, which according to later studies prolonged the Depression by several years. The whiz kids in the Pentagon under McNamara who managed to mess up the Vietnam War. You can run through an impressive list of things, of disasters brought about by people with very high IQs.
All right.
You see, Magma, it's funny you mentions Magmanera. I actually have a video about him. If you guys can go ahead and check that out, but after this video, right? I have a whole little video about with him and data. So I'll put the links in the cards somewhere up there. And after this video, you can check out that video, all right? But let's continue.
The species of the intellectual. When you refer to intellectuals in Intellectuals in Society, whom do you mean?
I mean people whose end products are ideas. There are other people with great intelligence whose end products are things like the Salk vaccine.
A research scientist is not necessarily an intellectual.
That's right.
An engineer isn't necessarily an intellectual.
That's right. Because the engineer is judged by the end product, which is not simply ideas. If he builds a building that collapses, it doesn't matter how brilliant his idea was, he's ruined. Conversely, if an intellectual who's brilliant has an idea for rearranging society, and that ends in disaster, he pays no price at all.
A person who's brilliant and intellectual, if he does something that ruins society, he pays no price at all. That is an interesting comment. It kind of wants to make you kind of wonder what he or who, maybe a group of people that he might have been talking about, was referring to. Makes you wonder, right? Makes you think. Let us continue.
The misstep of intellectuals is assuming that superior ability within a particular realm can be generalized to superior wisdom or morality overall. Chess grandmasters, musical prodigies, and others who are as remarkable within their respective specialties as intellectuals within theirs seldom make that mistake. Explain that. Why would it? Well, let's take an example. Noam Chomsky, whom you write about in Intellectuals in Society, whose work in linguistics, in the first place, I can't understand it, but as best I can tell, Everyone who
regarded.
exactly everyone who understands his technical work within the field, within his discipline of linguistics, considers him one of the great figures of the 20th century. And his work in politics?
Absurdity. The same could be said of Bertrand Russell and his landmark works on mathematics and other people in other fields, but they step outside their fields. And when you step outside your level of specialty, sometimes that's like stepping off a cliff.
And why is it that intellectuals, that is to say people whose end product is ideas, should succumb to that temptation more than, to use your example, a chess grandmaster?
Because a chess grandmaster can be world famous for doing absolutely nothing more than winning chess tournaments and making displays, as many of them do, of playing 5 chess games simultaneously while blindfolded.
So Bobby Fischer had no need to opine on the politics of the day because he was getting rich and famous and making a brilliant career for himself within his narrow profession.
That's right. That's right.
But intellectuals, what? They languish in obscurity, no matter how smart.
Well, the whole question of when is someone well known or not came up during the visit of Jim Flynn from New Zealand here a few years ago. He's one of the world's authorities on IQ tests. People, in India know about Jim Flynn. People in England, he made a world tour. But I doubt if the people in the next block from where he lives know who he is.
On an IQ test, it's kind of funny he says that because I think back in college when I think it was I would say, probably say my last year in college, I had a little assessment where we had to make an IQ test and kind of ask the people that we knew that's outside the class to take the IQ test, and we'll grade them based on a grading scale that we created. And overall, I think the overall point of that assessment or that assignment that was given to me was that the IQ test is really subjective, and even those tests that's meant to grade intelligence or rate intelligence, depending on what type of questions you get, it's really subjective to whoever decided to rank intelligence to begin with, or what levels of intelligence someone decided to say that, hey, because you passed such and such question or you describe such and such question, your level of intelligence is here compared to somebody who's probably not necessarily good at that particular question. Their intelligence is ranked a little bit lower than you. But then it also comes back to the point of what he also made as well with people in certain fields or certain high level fields where it takes certain knowledge to be able to excel in. We can use people in labs who work in labs and scientists, really. Like, those people aren't necessarily, and I would agree to this too, those people aren't necessarily intellects, but they are really, really good at what they do and what they study for, because they were astute enough to learn the concepts, learn those ideas, and then be able to apply those ideas to their field, and in turn use those ideas to maybe create their own hypothesis or their own conclusions on certain topics and certain things that's going on. So, but that's all within their realm of science, right? That's all in the realm of science. That's not necessarily in the realm of, okay, are some of those guys versatile enough to act to combat certain situations or issues that's outside of their field? A lot of them are not, and I can attest to that because I did take a degree in biology, and I knew a lot of people who were really good at what they were doing, or who were really good at the course or in that major. They were really scoring high marks, but if you were to take them out of that field, then it was like night and day with them. They knew nothing. They knew absolutely nothing. They almost like take them out of the classroom and bring them into a social setting. They do nothing. All right, so those are some of the stuff, in terms of like, can you grade somebody as an intellectual thoroughly, or is our way of looking at intellectuals or grading somebody who is an intellectual flawed? Which I think that might be the case. All right, but let's continue the video.
far easier to concentrate, again, I'm quoting from Intellectuals in Society, it is far easier to concentrate power than to concentrate knowledge.
Yes.
What bearing has that got on the influence that intellectuals have over society as a whole?
Because they believe that since knowledge is concentrated in people like themselves, what needs to be done is, in a quote from President Obama, is to put more power in the hands of the experts.
So the intellectual temptation is to say, look, we already know everything.
That's right.
If only we also had
The power.
all the power,
Yes.
everything would be just fine.
Yes.
And what's wrong with that view? Why isn't that a sensible view?
One, they don't know everything. They don't know 1/10 of everything. In fact, I argue that they probably don't know 1% of the consequential knowledge in a society.
Consequential knowledge is a concept that runs through this book. Explain that concept.
Knowledge whose presence or absence has consequences, serious consequences. I mean, I was once in a plane that was coming down for a landing in the Ithaca airport, and suddenly the pilot gunned the motor and went up again because someone in the control tower had reminded him that he hadn't lowered his landing gear. So that was consequential knowledge.
Right?
Yes. I was just delighted that person had his eyes open and his mind on his work.
So the notion here is that the kind of knowledge, the kind of consequential knowledge required to prove effective in governing a nation such as the United States with the biggest economy in the world, 300 million people, you can put together quite a large group of professors, and they're still not going to possess the knowledge that would enable them to run General Motors, for example, or to run the nation's healthcare system, for example.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of the things that has happened all around the world in the 20th century was that all sorts of countries have tried central planning. Now, the guys who run the central planning, they usually have advanced degrees from prestigious institutions. They have mountains of statistics sitting there, and they have all the experts in the country at their beck and call. And yet when you take the power out of their hands and return it to the market, then all the hundreds of millions of people who don't have any of those things usually end up with a higher rate of growth and a more rapid decline in poverty.
I agree with that. That's a great point because these quote-unquote experts are coming from certain privileged areas or privileged backgrounds where they don't know what the majority is going through, right? All they know is what they've experienced in their lives, which is very limited. Funny enough, because you would think that, hey, you know, you have all this access to money and all these resources, you'd be able to be well knowledgeable in what's going on in society, but that's far from the truth. That's far from the case. They're more gated than anyone else here because of that money and because of the level of pride or this level or this notion that, hey, because I have this much money, I don't need to be amongst, for lack of a better term, peasants. And another point he made too is taking the power away from experts. I think that is freaking genius because quote unquote experts, if you give them the power to run stuff, these experts will always, you know, if you give the power to these experts under the notion that they know everything, then they themselves would like to paint a narrative, right? I'm gonna use a sports analogy here, so bear with me here or not. Take for instance Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson coming into the draft was a quarterback. Is a a quarterback, right? He was a quarterback for, I believe, I might be wrong, might be North Carolina State or Ohio State. I think North Carolina State. I might be wrong on that, but I'll double check that. But regardless, he was coming out of college as a QB. He just had a great season. I believe he won the Heisman that year. No, he didn't win the Heisman that year. That was Baker Mayfield. He was a Heisman. He won a Heisman in one of the 3 years that he was there in college. That's for sure. And he was coming, and it was his third year, and he was, you know, every 3 years, you know, you can ask in college football, you got to wait 3 years before you're able to get to the NFL. Coming into the draft, a lot of criticism was coming in by quote unquote experts, saying that he was like a wide receiver, he was a running back, or you know, mainly a running back. He can't play the quarterback position in the NFL. Yada 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 yada, right? To the point where he ended up falling last in the first round. He ended up getting picked last in the first round of the NFL draft. Now there's 7 drafts in the NFL, which is, being picked 30th in the NFL draft isn't a bad thing, but in a sense, somebody who was a former Heisman winner got dropped so low. He was the 5th quarterback being picked in that. By the way, there was 4 of the quarterbacks that was picked before him, and they were all sought out as these top-notch quarterback QBs that were ready to go right now, which is even more funny because that's another story for another time. But he dropped all the way down to being the 5th quarterback being picked in the 30th, and the 30th overall QB being picked, 30th overall player being picked, and they waited about around the end of his first year, end of the first rookie year before they decided to start him, and boom, he just lit up the league completely lit up the league. After that, he went to the playoffs. He got knocked out. That was expected. The next year, his team had the best record in the league, and he was flying high. He was breaking records, rushing records as a QB, throwing. His percentages as a thrower was sky high. He was proving his doubters wrong, and these were experts that said he couldn't play the QB position in the NFL. Right? Those were the guys that were given the power to decide who gets picked or who gets drafted when or not get drafted at all because quote unquote they're experts, but they're not in tune with what's going on right now, how the landscape of the game is being shifted toward more dual threat QBs, right? Because Lamar Jackson would be placed under as a dual threat QB who can move and throw the football. But that experts made him drop to 30th. But now he's proven all his doubters wrong and showing them that, he is a QB. And by winning the MVP trophy of the league last year, he already solidified himself that these doubters didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. So, yeah, I completely agree. And that's just in the sport, and that's just in the sports aspect. Imagine all these experts that are in places of power that are, talking to people. That's got to be wild as hell. All right? But let's continue with the video a little bit more.
Consequential knowledge by its nature tends to be diffused, widely diffused.
Yes.
Right. Segment 2, intellectuals and economics. We've already touched on this. 2 quotations. Number 1, Paul Krugman, quote, "Rising income inequality isn't new, but what happened under Bush was something entirely unprecedented. For the first time in our history, so much growth was being siphoned off to a small, wealthy minority that most Americans were failing to gain ground even during a time of economic growth," close quote. Second quotation, Dr. Thomas Sowell in Intellectuals and Society. Quote, "The statistics that the intelligentsia keeps citing are much more consistent with their vision of America than the statistics they keep ignoring," close quote.
That's a tough one to encapsulate, but the basic confusion is between statistical categories and flesh and blood people. It's true that if you look at the percentage of the income that went to the top 20% and some year A, and then later on, a decade later, you'll find that percentage has gone up. And you say, well, that shows a disparity between the people. But
the rich are getting richer.
The rich are getting richer.
Right.
But when you follow statistics generated by the Internal Revenue Service, which can follow particular individuals over time, you find the people who are in the bottom 20% of taxpayers in the first year, their income is nearly doubled by this later period, while the income of the people who are initially at the top is increased by less. And if you get down to the very top, it's actually going down. So that people are simply moving between these brackets from year to year. And the number of people who are in the bottom 20%, let's say in 1975, who are still there in 1991 is 5% of them.
Really?
29% of them have already gotten all the way to the top. Absolute majority are in the top half. And so you're comparing what happens to these abstract categories rather than what's happening to actual flesh and blood people.
So there's an enormous amount of churn and dynamism within the American.
And almost everybody's own personal life. I mean, look, what were you making when you were 20 years old compared to what you were making when you were 40?
Negative. I was spending my parents' money when I was 20 years old, right?
There you go. So, I mean, that's another, I think what he's trying to point out is that over time, people were moving up in terms of financial class. So, like he explained about more than only 29% of people who were poor in 1975 was still there in 1991. That just goes to show you that over time, people, whatever situation they were in, it changes. And using these numbers and statistics that are just numbers and not necessarily factoring the human cognition or what humans go through on a day-to-day basis, those numbers can be viewed as skewed or not necessarily accurate enough, which I completely agree 100%, because you can't necessarily quantify certain stuff like random occurrence of like something good happening, or a random occurrence of like maybe you lucked out in a lotto, for example, or a random occurrence where you were, you got some sort of internship and you started working, and then later on you started working. Those types of things are not necessarily guaranteed to everybody. Those will be considered, I think, random occurrences. So you can't factor in that. Plus, whatever you can't factor certain people's drive. You can't quantify that. And the list goes on of stuff that are unquantifiable by numbers or by what do you call it again? Yeah, basically, yeah. The list goes on to dictate what's unquantified by numbers that are now put in statistics, where people are now gauging those numbers and trying to make decisions on very, very important things, which I think is extremely lazy on their part. All right, so apparently, Intellectuals and Society is a book by Thomas Sowell. So I didn't know. I thought the video was something that was worth the watch. It definitely is. I'm definitely doing a couple more parts on this for sure, because I think there's a lot of good nuggets in here. All right, so I will leave the video down in the description, and that'll be the video for today. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the video. Leave a comment about what part of the video that you believe was an intriguing part that you thought was very smart from Thomas Sowell or the narrator, and or did you not like the stuff that he was saying, right? Don't forget to hit the bell next to the name, don't forget to hit the bell next to the subscribe button so that you are notified whenever any videos drop. And I'll catch you guys later, alright? Take care. Let me start with congratulations, sooner or later appreciation for all the work you've put in. Damn, you came farther than the depths of the ocean water. Still undiscovered, Earl Jones will be proud of. Still chasing things out loud, scope change. For better or worse, I still left unhinged.